of the Green Bay Planning Commission. Starting out with a roll call. Chair Lisa Hanson, present. Vice Chair Jacob Miller.
Present.
Alder Veronica Corpus Dax. Commissioner Sydney Bremer.
Present.
Commissioner Darius DJ Daniels.
Present.
And Commissioner Autumn.
Present.
All right, moving on to the approval of the agenda. Approval of the agenda for the March 8th, 2021 meeting of the Green Bay Plan Commission.
Motion to approve. Second.
Motion by Alder Corpus Dax, second by Commissioner Bremer. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? And then moving on to the approval of the minutes. Approval of the minutes from the February 22nd, 2021 meeting of the Green Bay Plan Commission.
So moved. Second.
Motion by Alder Corpus Dax and a second by Commissioner Linsmeyer. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, and that moves on to the regular business, starting with a public hearing. This public hearing has been properly posted and public notification has been published in the Green Bay Press Gazette. The Plan Commission is interested in hearing public comments on the subject agenda items. We invite your comments and ask that after your name has been called, you state your address, whether you represent a group or association, whether you favor, oppose, or are only providing information in this matter, and your comments or concerns. We also ask that you confine your testimony to facts related to the proposal at hand and avoid repetitive testimony. You must be recognized by the Plan Commission in order to speak, and please address your comments to the chair. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes. We will now open the public hearing on item 1, public hearing on the request to amend Chapter 13-303, Land Use Definitions, Chapter 13-1606, Drive-Through Facility, Chapter 13-1714, Figure 2, Off-Street Parking regarding requirements for drive-through facilities. And do we want to start with a small overview from staff, please?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. I can give you a real brief overview. I think we've talked about drive-through facilities in the past a little bit. So this is a text amendment with a draft that goes along with it to amend some of the requirements for drive-through facilities. It kind of comes in 3 different chunks. One is the definition, an amendment to that, an amendment to the development standards that we have in place, and then an amendment to our parking section, which has to do with queuing of vehicles. We're going to roll that into the development standards. So staff will go through the ordinance of the next item in detail. We can talk about those changes in greater detail.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Paul. All right, so we're now opening the public hearing and we're looking for interested parties who are in favor of the proposal. And honestly, I don't see anyone except all of us and some alders in here. So I'll just move along to any that are opposed. And is there anyone looking to provide information only? Is there anyone else wishing to speak? Is there anyone else wishing to speak? Is there anyone else wishing to speak? Let the record reflect that no one came forward and this public hearing is now closed. Moving on to agenda item number 2, consideration with possible action on a request to amend Chapter 13-303, Land Use Definitions, Chapter 13-1606, Drive-Through Facility, and Chapter 13-1714, Figure 2, Off-Street Parking regarding requirements for drive-through facilities.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to go ahead and bring up the ordinance here. we can kind of go through it point by point. So can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So this is the draft ordinance that staff has put together. Again, I was talking about those three sections, the definition, the development standards, and then amending the parking section down here below. So just kind of starting at the top, the changes here, the first thing is with the definitions. We've kind of reworded it a little bit, wordsmithed it a little bit to be more precise, so to speak. So everything you see that's in a strike through is being removed from the ordinance. Everything you see that's in kind of a bold face or with an underline is amended language or new language. So in this case, the definition is changing. Basically, it's going to be a facility consisting of a dedicated drive aisle that leads to and from a service area for the sale and dispensation of food, beverage, or other consumer items to patrons and motor vehicles. Such facilities may include, but are not limited to, restaurants, pharmacies, and financial institutions. So that's the first batch. The second batch, and kind of the meat of the changes, are in the development standards. And we've had development standards for a number of years related to drive-through facilities. I think they're like 1 through 6 or 7 here. So the ones that don't have anything, any lines through them or any changes remain as is. So in the first one here, we've kind of gone through and tweaked the placement of the windows and menu board. We don't want those facing public streets. So we've adjusted that language there. And number 2, well, we've kind of clarified points about circulation on site. And again, we were concerned about the relationship between motor vehicles and pedestrians on site. So we've kind of clarified that in point 2. 3, 4, and 5 really don't change at all. That's existing language that will remain as is. Item 6, I think staff has mentioned this before. This is the bypass lane that we've talked about. We call it an emergency lane. Basically, that's a lane around the drive-through in case someone has to get out. And again, based on our research or limited research of other communities, we're kind of one of the few, if only one, that requires that emergency lane. So we felt we could eliminate that. And then there's kind of a trade-off with that. And that goes down into redefining number 6 here. So we've never had some minimums regarding drive-throughs in their aisle space. So we're going to build that into item 6 here. 10 feet, that's a number related to the radius or a turning movement, most likely around the corner of a building for drive-throughs. And then we've established a minimum aisle width of 14 feet. And it's somewhat arbitrary. We came up with that number kind of hopefully using some common sense. Parking spaces are 9 feet wide. Travel lanes on arterial streets are maybe 10, 11, 12 feet wide. And we went up a little bit higher to 14 feet. Again, with the elimination of the bypass lane, we want to make sure that police, fire, and rescue, if they have to, can get in there. There's also, larger vehicles, there's door swings, there's other reasons why we want to increase that width. So 14 is a number that we arrived at. There is kind of a benefit if you do have multiple drive-throughs, and you might see that with McDonald's, Burger King, and other fast food places. If you have more than one, you can then reduce that down to 10 feet. The idea there is that you could probably have more ability to get into that aisle space for police, fire, and rescue, so we felt that was an appropriate discount, so to speak. Item 7 is new. Again, really has to do with traffic on site, and in this case, really the pedestrians. We want to make sure that the drive-through facilities are clearly marked with pavement markings and signage. And we want to make sure that if the pedestrian crosses a drive-through lane, that it's marked. We want to make sure there's a clear distinction between those two uses. Item 8 is kind of tied into the third change down here in the parking section. For some reason, we've always had this kind of buried in our parking section. Staff felt it was more appropriate to bring the queuing up into the development standards, so it's kind of in one spot for those who are looking at drive-through facilities. So the language doesn't change. We eliminated it in the parking section, and we bring it up into the drive-through standards. And then finally, item 9 has to do with the traffic impact analysis. I think the key word here is may. I think it's to kind of put people on notice that it may be required. Drive-throughs obviously generate a lot of different traffic. in circumstances. So this gives us an ability to enforce on that. I have to let you know, I mean, we kind of, our traffic engineer can kind of require this already if we feel there's a problem. And a lot of times we do clear with our traffic engineer on most drive-through facilities. So this is just to be kind of transparent about the potential, I guess, of a TIA for review by our traffic engineer. So that's the draft ordinance as we propose. We've hopefully included some comments that we discussed with the Plan Commission in the past. So this is the draft that we're sharing, and we are recommending approval subject to this draft ordinance before you.
Thank you, Paul. Were there any questions from the commission? Go ahead.
Thank you. So I had concerns when we first talked about this. I think it was back in a November meeting, because one of the recommendations was basically to set up this drive-through ordinance, but it wouldn't apply to the downtown district. Basically, downtown district wouldn't be able to have a drive-through. So I guess what recommendations are there, or considerations that will be taken, or things that will be taken into consideration to allow drive-throughs in the downtown district? Because I mean, there's kind of a number of these points that would still make it prohibitive for a drive-through in downtown.
Sure. So we've discussed in the past about maybe eliminating drive-throughs in downtown. I don't think the Plan Commission was excited about that. So we didn't touch the use. It still remains a conditional use permit in the downtown district for a drive-through. With that said, we haven't made any changes or allotments for such facilities in the downtown. I think staff's position is a drive-through is a drive-through. We have to have, we feel, minimum standards for drive-throughs, whether that's in the downtown or in our suburban areas. So I don't know that there's any relief that we would propose at this point, just because we feel drive-through should be treated, the same across the board.
Mm-hmm. So I do have concerns, especially with the 14-foot width. I know you had mentioned that it was an arbitrary number. Most vehicles are 6.5 feet. Our travel lanes, like you said, were 10 to 11 feet. I think the highway lane is 12 feet. So 14 feet seems excessive. When we can travel down Walnut Street going 25 miles an hour, when we can travel down a highway going 70 miles an hour, that's only 12 feet. I guess I would rather see there be a minimum of 10 feet. I mean, Alloway has a minimum of 8 feet. That seems a little small to me. But I think over on Webster, they had a new bank go in, and driving past there, seeing that drive-through lane, that's 8 feet. And they have room. Alloway has room. They didn't have to make it that small, but they did. So, I guess I would rather see the width of the drive-through lane be 10 feet rather than 14. Director Neal, do you have any? I know we talked about this earlier.
Yeah, I think much as what Mr. Newmeyer has indicated, the lane is a little bit subjective in terms of certainly it is this situation where the more room that can be provided, certainly the better the lane functions. I don't think anyone will certainly disagree with that evaluation. However, certainly it does increase each foot that is added from a width standpoint. Does make it actually can make it more difficult for certain parcels to be able to implement this type of lane, so to speak. So I think it is certainly. I believe Paul has referenced his ability to try to find a good balance in terms of what an appropriate width would be, in addition to providing some additional flexibility to get in and out of a lane or to get access to a lane if someone's already there. I do think that it is a situation where If it is primarily a public safety concern, I think that is as long as our public safety personnel are not indicating any concern with a proposed width, then most likely we would be, I think from a planning staff, would certainly not argue with the public safety officials in terms of their ability to get in and out of a particular location. If they are acceptable with a proposed width, certainly they're the ones who are going to be dealing with any issues on site, would kind of be deferring to them. At that particular point, I think in passing the conversations with a couple of public safety staff have been, they feel for at least most of the existing drive-throughs, they don't have it. They feel they can get into to service a resident or a visitor in most cases. They don't have a severe concern. I think the real issue, as Alder Dax did mention, is that if you do look at a downtown environment, this is more likely to be a smaller lot, is more likely to be a redevelopment site. There's more likely to be obstacles and things certainly in the way, so to speak, in terms of trying to make something like this work. So I think the lane standard is the width standard is certainly something that I think we could take a look at as staff. I think that at the end of the day, the important part is that the actual drive aisle functions, and that the applicant has the opportunity to show that the actual movement, the lane movement, actually is a functional movement. And there are ways of doing that. There's software to help confirm that the turning movement of a vehicle can actually function without largely staying within the lane. There is a manner to do that. So I think, that plus some of the other matters, I think there's, what you'll see kind of with a lot of the conversations and I think recommendations in Mr. Newmeyer's memo, certainly we want these things to visually be compatible with the areas that they're in. We don't want them to certainly create any unnecessary conflicts with pedestrians to the extent possible. So they should be designed properly. You'll see there really aren't any concerns, I don't think, with the language in the ordinance as it's presented with those particular type of items. So I think it really does come down to a functionality item in terms of the width itself. Making sure that you're comfortable. I think a lot of folks, certainly using the drive aisle comparison to normal driving lanes is certainly one that's interesting. And to other communities, understanding that they've done that as well and used a little bit lesser width on this case. So I do think in terms of establishing some sort of standard width is, I think, certainly is cleaner. It's easier, I think, for the city to implement and kind of oversee and track. But I also see the desire to have some degree of flexibility when there are particular instances to allow these drive-through to occur on a site that may not be perfectly ideal and have all of the room in order to do that. Particularly my comment with regards to allowing these downtown, would certainly agree that, Paul's comment that traditionally downtowns have been an area where these certainly drive-throughs are not necessarily or historically have been encouraged. I think the pandemic has kind of maybe forced us to rethink that a little bit in terms of some of these smaller businesses and restaurants not being permitted that ability to provide some sort of drive-up facility to their establishment simply because they've located downtown could be perceived as somewhat kind of a penalty. So I think my read is from situations and comments that I've heard so far is that while we're certainly not looking to open the floodgates to allowing excessive amounts of drive-throughs in the downtown area, I think there is a desire to allow them when they make sense and when they can safely be implemented. So I think that is something that we want to look at as certainly, I think probably a 10-foot width certainly could possibly work. I think I like having a little bit of a higher standard with the ability to become flexible for a lesser width when it's demonstrated that it can function at that lesser width. Is my personal reaction to, I think, to that particular item.
Yes, I would rather see a 10-foot width. I mean, if we're going to allow, if 10 foot is like the minimum we're going to allow, or if we say, okay, well, the minimum's 12, or the minimum's 14, but we would consider a 10-foot width. I guess I would just rather make that the 10-foot width rather than having that sliding scale there. And to me, it just makes it a cleaner ordinance in that aspect.
if I could make a point, going down to 10 feet across the board might be too much. Maybe 14 is too much, but you could reduce that possibly. But I think we're talking about the downtown area itself, and that requires a conditional use permit regardless. So I think we could build in some language that we would keep the 14 feet, but we could consider reducing that number based on some sort of performance standard that maybe Neil was referring to. So I think 14 across the board makes sense, but in the downtown, when they apply for the conditional use permit, they would have to provide some engineering evidence that they could make this function, and then let the Plan Commission decide at that point. Not send them to the Board of Appeals, but let the Plan Commission, ultimately the council, kind of decide. So I just kind of want to throw that out there. I haven't, worked that up necessarily, but just for your consideration. I would hate to apply 10 feet across the board because I think that would be detrimental possibly to
So
the rest of the community.
does DPW have the technology, the software to help make that determination if a drive-through is whatever? I'm sorry. What was the software that you had said that they have?
Director
Sure,
Grenier
yeah,
has. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, they have that ability as well as analyzing at least an initial look at the traffic, so we can rely on them for that. However, in many cases, we put that back on the applicant for them to maybe provide independent evidence, so we're not skewing it one way or the other, that they can present their own case. So, but yes, we can do it, yes.
Alder Corpus Dax, if I can add to that, it's like they do have, again, for I think for smaller projects, I think it is something that could be accommodated. Probably, I can't speak for Director Grenier, but my understanding is that they would be willing to accommodate that certainly for a smaller project, so it doesn't become a cost prohibitive type of factor. So,
this is Alder Lefebvre. Can I make a comment?
Yes, absolutely. Go ahead.
Yeah. I really think that you've got to really think about this when you're talking about downtown. You have buildings that are very close together. You're going to have trouble, I think, with drive-throughs to these buildings. There aren't many that are 14 feet, 15, 16 feet wide. They're very narrow. We have a lot of them that are very narrow. And so I think you better be very careful what you're doing when you're doing your WIF. And I want to mention, you talk about the pandemic, you think that they need the drive-thrus. Well, the pandemic will eventually be gone. But I want to point out the Attic Coffee Shop. They have no drive-thru, and they've been doing very well because they've handled how they've done all their inside. It's done so well that people are fine going there, and nobody has ever had any COVID coming out of that building. They've done fine. So a drive-thru necessarily doesn't have to have a coffee shop, restaurant. It depends on how you do your business. But I also want to bring up, are you aware that there are cities in the United States that are banning all drive-thrus in their cities? Minneapolis is the latest. They do not want them because of the CO2, carbon monoxide in that. Cars are very polluting. And when you're idling, it's worse when you're really close to buildings. So I think we really got to look at this for downtown. And some of these other areas where they put in, like the new bank, was mentioned in Alloway, I believe, they're not between two big buildings, a close space. So they have a lot of room to move, and I'm surprised that they put it at 8 feet, unless they have multiple lanes. But I think we have to really look at that. And you had mentioned that for the downtown, there will still be a conditional use permit going through the committee?
Correct.
That's correct, right? Nothing's changed with the use of drive-through facilities in downtown.
Then I think in this ordinance, then you're taking it out. You're actually crossing that whole part out. Plan for on-site circulation drive-through locations shall be reviewed as part of a conditional use review process. That's stricken. So I think you need to keep that in there. Or else you're going to have to put another one in here. Downtown will go through that process. Because if you take it out of here, this is the whole ordinance.
I don't see that.
There's not a separate one, is there?
I don't see that as part of our draft. I just presented that to the Plan Commission, and we are not proposing that at this time.
Okay, because this is what was what I printed out. Okay. Right, because I would definitely say, yeah, that needs to stay in there.
I think Paul, I believe the alder is referring to section 2, item 1, subparagraph 2, where it says plans shall be reviewed as part of the conditional use process is crossed out.
Right. Yeah, so I would think that would have to stay in. And then I want to go down to, I still think that the emergency lane, that should go through the conditional use process, I believe, because there are areas where if the building is very tight, you're going to have to, that should be put in here, that you still need to look at that.
Don't they look at that? Is that part of the process that it's run
Number
by
6 it's
the
stricken.
safety?
It's stricken in this. All the curb stack. Number 6, it's stricken in the in this ordinance. So I'm just pointing that out.
Paul, could you put that screenshot up again?
Sure. So Alderperson LaFay was referring to this previously, and Neil had just commented on that we've crossed this out here.
Right.
And then in 6, we've discussed that in the past. That's the emergency exit lane, and that's proposed to be removed from the ordinance. And again, in exchange for a wider aisle space for the drive-through.
Okay, right, because then there's room. But if you bring it down to 10 feet, 8 feet, if you've got a building that's 13 feet space between two, you're going to have problems. So, yeah, as long as it's the 14 feet, then it would be enough room for the driving, for the cars, and for them to get in for emergencies.
Hey, Paul, quick question on this. I remember, I know Alder Colquhoun talked about this earlier, but when this was brought to the Plan Commission before, from a, I guess, developer, they had the pictures and the lane use, and we talked about the emergency, the exit lanes, and how, our requirement is probably a little bit stricter than some other areas. Do we have, and just for my personal, do we have a lot of developers trying to put like drive-throughs in downtown? Is this a one-off situation? Are we thinking this is going to be a trend and it's going to change? Can you just give a little bit more insight into that?
Yeah, I think in recent memory, I guess 901 is kind of the poster child. That's the most recent one that's come through. I can't think of any other drive-through facilities in recent memory that have been in the downtown area. I think we only have 1 or 2 to begin with Associated Bank downtown and their drive-up banking facility, but I can't think of too many others. So I think this is relatively new.
Go ahead, Alderdorf.
Thank you. So the Shopko Pharmacy was one. In fact, I drove there today and I looked at that and the width of that, which certainly is less wide than the 901 main. But I was just kind of curious as to what that one had looked like before came in there. But the other thing I'm thinking is, I think we need to really nail down language. And it seems that this doesn't even seem ready for a vote right now. I'm just saying from the outside looking in, I'm wondering if there's any thought on the Plan Commission's part to refer this back to staff. I think it's good, Neil, that you said we can look at this for CUPs, but if it's not written down, it doesn't exist and it didn't happen. And so that, I really think that language has to be in there if we're going to allow them. I think 14 still is big, but again, staff has got to look at that. 12 might be okay. There's just a lot. It just doesn't seem quite ready yet, but perhaps I'm wrong. What do you guys think?
Well, I do remember, and I think that's a great point, but I do also remember in that presentation, staff did bring in, and Paul, someone please correct me if I'm wrong, but the applicant had maybe the fire, I don't know the right terminology, but had the fire people come out and look at it, and they didn't really have any concerns. They're the experts. They really didn't have any concerns because the emergency exit lane or emergency lane wasn't there. So I guess if the experts are saying they don't really have a concern, and staff is saying we want it to be 14, which gives a little bit more leeway for some type of entrant, I guess, again, I'm trying to look at all sides. What is the concern around the language? Or can we not just say must be a minimum of 10 in the ordinance, or do we have to be very specific on the size?
Well, I think the point is that we're not very specific right now. So I think, looking at the ordinance again, we wanted to improve it, if anything. So I think what we're proposing is hopefully an upgrade to what we have for minimum standards. It's not saying it's perfect, but it's an improvement to modern times, so to speak.
No.
It's all little fave again. I got another one. I'm sorry.
Well, there's other people with their hands up.
Could I follow this up on this particular issue, please? Am I understanding correctly that there is a trade-off here, Paul, between having a provision for an emergency lane and having a standard size that is large enough to basically accommodate most emergencies?
I think that's correct. And that's kind of the heart of the change in my mind from staff, is that there's a trade-off. Again, we found other communities didn't have an emergency lane. So, okay, so maybe we don't need one. So, but then we thought, well, okay, but we need to have it wide enough so emergency services can get in there. That just seems to be common sense, as well as larger vehicles that might go through. So, yeah, I think that's the heart of the change here.
Did you check this with other offices, particularly those with EMT or fire trucks or whatever, as to what size would accommodate an emergency situation?
I didn't get a strong answer. So there's two departments. One is our traffic engineer. He didn't want to comment on private property circulation. His contention is more with the public right of way. I did reach out to the fire marshal. He did respond to me, but he wanted to remain neutral on this topic. So I think I mentioned that to the commission in the past, and so we're kind of fending for ourselves and trying to find that happy medium that's going to work and improve situations, not make them worse.
We do want to remember that there's another option, and we've been sort of dancing around it, and that is an appeal. If we have a standard that is too large for a particular situation, and that situation suggests that emergencies could be managed because of the next door lot or whatever, that would be something that might go to appeal. And I think as long as it's understood, and this goes back to Veronica Corpus-Stax's earlier concern, if it's understood that these standards are open to appeal, then I think we can go with something a little bit on the large side, though I'm just not sure that 14 is necessary. I'm kind of leaning toward a 12, but based on a desire for compromise, I guess, more than anything else.
Can I just respond to Commissioner Bremer? So when 901 came up, Plan Commission said, let's send this through on the condition that fire, I can't remember what order it came in. It either, when it was first presented, they said, yep, we don't have a problem with EMTs gaining access to, to a vehicle if there's a situation. And so we passed this through on the conditions that fire also didn't have an issue with fire trucks doing whatever job they needed to do, and also Board of Appeals. So when it first went to Board of Appeals, they kind of said they were indecisive and said, let's send this to council and see what council says. Council approved it. They didn't, I mean, it was either 8-4 or 7-5. I think it was 7-4, 1 abstention. They approved it. It went back to Board of Appeals, and whatever their discussion was there, I wasn't able to attend that part of the meeting. They ended up saying no. Alder Dorf, do you recall why, like what their exact reasoning was? Because, I mean, it seemed like this should have passed. They kicked it to council and wanted council's opinion. Council gave their opinion, and then they came back and said no.
First.
They did come back and say no. So, I would, it was a fairly contentious meeting. And I wasn't even there for that item. I was there for a different item. But I really think we need to work on this at the ordinance level. It shouldn't be going to the Board of Appeals. We need to do is come up with language that is clear enough that if there is a true hardship, yes, that's what we have this Board of Appeals for. But if we already can predict that it's going to have to go to Board of Appeals, then our ordinance isn't good enough.
Yeah.
Then we really need to do something differently with our ordinance. And again, let's look at the Shopko drive-through. That existed. That was downtown. That was even more narrow than what is being asked for at 901. And those aren't the only two in the world. There certainly could be other things. There's a bank down there, right? I think there's a bank down there too. So, and Mr. Buck has been up a long time. So I guess stop talking.
Can I speak? Okay, I just wanted to jump in at one point because this seems to be a discussion on 901 Main, and this is a discussion on drive-throughs throughout the community, throughout the downtown and everywhere. So keep in mind, this isn't a one-size-fits-all, but I wanted to make a point about 901 Main. We did have the fire marshal take a look at it, but he was looking at it specifically at that site. The building was less than 50 feet long. So their ability to get into that drive-through at that point was specific to that site. So when you say that the fire chief may not have a problem with one that's 100 feet long, he may. Right. Because he would not be able to access those vehicles on that long of a strip. I just want to also point that out. And that was one of the reasons when staff looked at the width, 3 feet would be enough for a person to walk down next to the cars and be able to open the door. So I did want to point that out because it's not that the fire chief did not comment on 901. They did, but it was specific to 901 alone. And then the only other point I wanted to bring up is, the Board of Appeals is looking for a hardship from the code. That's what their job is. They're not legislators. They take the code and look for a hardship. Is there a hardship, something that makes it not usable because of the code regulations? The site is usable. It's got a business on it. I was at that meeting as well. They had a discussion. Pretty much they felt that was too narrow of a lane. Right now, our code has no standard for lanes. So I wouldn't kick it to the Board of Appeals either. They need to be able to base it on something that the council tells them is the law. They don't set the law. Right. So 14, the reason why we have the 14, as Paul has explained, if you don't agree with that, I mean, the council doesn't agree with that, that's fine. That's your right to change that. But yeah, if you put it at 14, the board is going to base it on a 14-foot width. If you put it at 12, they're going to base it on 12. Again, they're looking for a hardship, typically a steep slope, a very old, hard redevelopment site, something that is outside of the owner's control. 901 was really didn't meet code and I want it. They could not discern a hardship, and that's why they denied it. I'm not sure why they kicked it to council at first. I think it was more a timing issue, that if the use wasn't permitted, they didn't want to have to make a judgment on the lane width, or it wasn't lane width, it was the exit lane. But they still had to base it on I think, what is there, Paul, like 5 criteria that they have to look at for every appeal? And if they can't check those boxes, they don't grant the appeal.
Right. I think the board kicked it to council because there was concern about a survey that came in late. I think they didn't feel comfortable with the information they had. So I don't know that they defaulted to council. I think they wanted more information as well. But that was resolved at the January meeting.
Right. So, I mean, you can build into the code. I mean, the council's the code adopters, code writers, we're the code writers, I guess, but you can build in a flexibility into that. You could have an administrative exception. You could build in that as part of a CUP that can be reduced, but it's got to be written into the municipal code. But as Paul alluded to, language like that, we put that in the code in many places. In our design standards section for a lot of our PUDs has the director of community development can vary this. And if it's challenged, then it would come to the plan commission and council. That's just one example. I'm sorry, Neil. I'll be quiet now.
No, actually, you took the words right out of my mouth, David. I think, in terms of that process, I agree. I think the ideal response is updating this ordinance to kind of keep this as a plan commission council review, essentially. So the ordinance needs to be established to a point. So that process, I think, is probably should be more than sufficient for almost every foreseeable instance where a drive-through would happen. The rare instance where it does actually, there is an actual hardship, that is the case when it should go to the zoning board of appeals. But I think in terms of, if we clarify and define this ordinance to a point that is clear enough that matches the plan commission and council's desires on this, I think that will help make sure that this remains kind of a standard review process, just like we do for any other standard that's in our zoning code, that it is something that comes through as a plan commission council review. And I do think that retaining the conditional use permit analysis for downtown it might be the ability to allow for some degree of flexibility, to help address some unforeseen types of standards in an area where there isn't enough room. It is a smaller lot, but if it can be demonstrated that it's functional, that it works safely and it's not a detriment, that it would allow that to still occur. So I do agree with David's comments and Alder Dorf's comments that this should in my opinion, should be a planning commission council process that this needs to go through with a staff recommendation, just like this body reviews any number of other issues related to development.
Go ahead.
Can I make
next?
I think my concern with it, so if we were to have a, let's say the minimum is 12 feet and then, but we'll look at 10 feet, council having the final say as to whether or not they would accept that. And this was pointed out to me, you're, as an alder, if this were my district, we'll just say Brian, for example, if someone were to come in and, put in a, that's, butting up against to some houses, and we're saying, well, work here, so let's allow that. But you have residents that are also against this. So this was actually a good example, would have been Burger King on University. You said, yep, that actually could work here. But you have residents that don't want that there. They would rather have some other kind of business there, like something that's not fast food, something that's not going to cause, bring in a lot of traffic. allowing council to kind of have that final say is pitting the older kind of against the residents as well as the business. You know, you have residents who are saying, oh, we don't want this. You have a developer, you want to be business friendly. You want to, you want developers to come back to the city, and you're kind of putting them in that tough position where I feel like being able to have that one minimum requirement would kind of make that easier and not force that elder, whoever they are, in that position. And you might have a council. In the past, we've had councils that weren't so business friendly, and it's kind of like, look where that got us. In the future, it might go back that way, where we have councils that are not agreeing to progress, not agreeing to other ideas, and, kind of just want to keep things the way they are. It makes it tough. So I guess I would rather see, again, go back to like a minimum requirement of saying the minimum requirement in the ordinance being 10 feet versus a two-step where, maybe the minimum's 12, but we'll also consider something smaller if it fits. I think if we allow that software to do, to do its job, and software says, yeah, 10 feet would work here, then we make that minimum 10. And because I don't see a whole lot of drive-throughs popping up downtown. I mean, there's very few places where this could actually work.
Go ahead, Alder Steuer.
Thank you, Chair. A lot of good comments tonight. I concur with Alder Dorf and with Neil. I think we should bring it back to Plan Commission and really tighten this up. I think with the additional uses and such, the hardship things that come forward, it works in some areas, it doesn't work in other areas, and we're looking at a citywide ordinance here. So 14 feet, they might be too wide. I'd like to know what other communities do as well. So it seems like there's a little uncertainty as far as moving forward on this. So I would like to see it go back to staff and really go over it, tighten it up a little bit, because it seems like people are a little unsure right now. Thank you.
Go ahead, Commissioner Bremer.
That does seem called for, but I remember that Alder LaFave said she had another issue to raise, and I think we should make sure that we have that on the table as well.
Thank you. Yes, there's one other thing that I just wanted to point out. Number 7, the second part, pedestrian crosswalk shall be clearly marked through the drive alley where necessary. That has to be reworded. You can't have a walkway and a drive-through in the same space. I'm looking at safety. That's not safe at all.
Yeah, Kathy, that's where the drive-through crosses perpendicular to the crosswalk.
Okay.
So if you're going, you got to go through the drive-through lane to get into the building. That has to be striped. It's not, they don't run parallel.
Yep.
Okay, I just want to make sure, right, because you got your walkway, and then next to it you got your drive-through, right? Side by side. Is that what you're saying?
No.
No, Alder, I think they were saying in that case, they were saying in terms of where, if there's a customer parking area that needs to cross the actual, perpendicularly cross the drive-through aisle to get into the establishment, that there's a clear delineated safe area for pedestrians to cross that lane. That's why the actual pavement marking and delineation, a lot of times you'll even see some small signage, other things providing a safe area for pedestrians to cross into, to actually get into, for actual in-person customers to actually get into the restaurant or other shop.
Okay, because the one that we are talking about, 901, there is a walkway in between those buildings. I just want to make sure that that's not included in the drive-through, that the cars can actually drive on that crosswalk. That's what I'm concerned about.
It's no different than a public street where there's through traffic and you have a crosswalk. We just want to make sure that there's pavement markings that clearly identify that pedestrians are going to be going through here. So it alerts the motorist that, hey, don't cross here if there's someone in the pedestrian connection.
Okay.
So, Madam Chair, with that understood, I'd like to refer this back to staff. I move to refer this back to staff.
Thank you, Commissioner. That's what we needed. Thank you.
Oh, there you go. The force, it's got force.
Make room for that second.
I'll second that, but on what conditions or grounds or whatever the word is that I'm looking for, are we referring it back to staff? Like what exactly? I mean, obviously I prefer they look at that lane width.
Uh-huh. And that's the primary reason, I think.
That's the primary.
Yeah. Both taking into consideration the problems of emergency, but also the need for a clear standard that will serve us well. And I think also the reinstatement, as several of you have suggested, of the conditional use check.
I have another question. If it's possible that DPW may require a traffic impact analysis, does it need to be in this ordinance? If they might require it anyway?
It is there.
I know, but if they're going to require it in any way, do we need it in our ordinance or in this ordinance?
I was like, Mr. Newmeyer, correct me if I'm wrong. We have the Department of Public Works can, especially as it relates to the public right of way, can actually request a traffic impact analysis for any project already. So it is not by having the language in this particular ordinance, I guess doesn't necessarily. I think Mr. Newmeyer included it simply as a communication, as a potential that it may be required. Just as kind of a heads up to the applicant, but it does not technically change the city's position on what we can request on these.
Okay, so it's just kind of another, if you didn't see it the first time coming through DBW, you're going to see it coming from here.
Yeah.
Right, I think the development standards kind of act as a checklist almost in some cases, and not everyone's from Green Bay, so it's a checklist for them to make sure they address those as part of their site plan.
Right, and I think that's important too, because the site plans come in, the conditional use permits have to come in way before the site plans are even submitted, months before. So that provision for Public Works is actually in the site plan review. So they might not know to have to do that if it wasn't listed again. Does that make sense? Yes.
I guess I'd like to offer one change before you finally vote. I mentioned earlier about the process of the CUP, and I put some language together quickly for your consideration. And we can bring this back in if you want to think about it, but I've highlighted some language that affects the CUP. So if someone's going to be getting a CUP, the drive-through may be reduced by built in 10 feet, provided there's some engineering evidence and approval of emergency services. Now that has to be kind of wordsmithed and maybe corrected a little bit, but I think that would maybe address some of the concern you have with the 14 feet in the downtown area. I think 14 feet, again, is good for suburban areas, and if you're concerned about the downtown, this is some flexibility that could be built into 6 to let the Plan Commission make that choice, not the board, with some backing by some sort of engineering evidence, either a city engineer or a private engineer, and then, you know, our emergency service, police, fire, and rescue could also comment. So I would just offer that for your consideration, because I'm not sure how staff would react and what we could bring back to you that would be much different than 14 feet. It could be 13 feet, it could be 12 feet, but I don't know that our recommendation will change a great deal. So I just want that for your education, I guess.
Engineering evidence of what, Paul?
Well, I just tried to scribble that down quick. So it would be some sort of engineering study. I don't want to, again, overload someone in the private sector to provide huge studies, but I think there has to be a professional. If you're going to reduce that from 14 to 10, let's say, that a professional engineer should be involved and provide a professional recommendation for you to consider. Not saying you have to make that change, but you want engineering evidence and you want police, fire, and rescue to tell you that it's okay. I think the decision for you should be as simple as it can be. You shouldn't have to decipher anything with a CUP. That information should be transparent to you and obvious. So I'm not here to, say you shouldn't send it back. That's sort of your prerogative. I'm just saying I don't know what would change from staff's perspective if you're just talking about a number. I think we could work on that language that I just showed, or there's any number of routes you could go. I guess I just wanted to offer that.
Go ahead, Neil.
Madam Chair, if there is a set direction that that the commission would like us in terms of a number to look at, I think that would certainly be helpful. For us to specifically evaluate that. I agree. Paul's assessment is certainly he's done a considerable amount of research and work to develop the 14. But if 12 is the number you'd like us to look at, if 10 is the number you'd like us to look at, I think that there are some analysis we can run as a staff, using the same thing we would have an applicant do, essentially to help evaluate a turning movement and so forth. If there was a particular number for us to take a look at, I think there would be some examples we could probably use to try to ascertain and further evaluate that with, if there was a specific direction that this commission would really like us to take a look at. I suppose we could run both of them and try to work on trying to analyze both of those, use an existing project and run the widths at different ones and see how that operates and functions and bring that back. But I think the more specific direction this body can provide staff, the better off. I think the more likely are to bring you back something exactly of what you're looking for.
Right. The other thing we could do is look at what other communities have for their lane. I mean, if we looked at 20 communities and they all are 10, that might give us an indication, but I suspect you're going to find some that might be more varied than that. 8 seems incredibly small, and it's shocking that Alloway would do that. And when you talk about the Shopko down on Broadway, that was done as part of plan unit development. It was not considered ideal when it was put in. It was a necessity for having the pharmacy there. But arguably, you could say it's not functioning any longer. And maybe it wasn't the best design. I don't know. Or you could argue, arguably, right? Shop was out of business, so maybe that's the reason, right?
Well, I would ask Alder Corpus Dax whether or not the approach that Paul sketched out is the sort of thing that you would like to see in there.
I mean, I like the 10 feet.
I know you like the 10 feet, but I mean the approach that requires anybody requesting something lower than whatever the standard is, provide evidence that it would be functional. That seemed to be what you were asking for before.
Yes. Paul, can you bring up what you had, please?
Now, again, this is my scribbling real quick here. So in the case of a CUP, again, that's only going to apply to the downtown area. The aisle width, wrong spelling. Width of the drive-through. Yeah, I have to spell check stuff. The width of a drive-through may be reduced to no less than 10 feet. So that's the bottom, that's the floor. 10 feet, you can't go any lower. But to get to that 10 feet, you've got to do some sort of engineering work with a professional engineer, and you need our emergency services to sign off, probably in a memo or something to the Plan Commission. So you've got, again, 2 hands to look at.
Right, and that language sounds really familiar too. I believe in one of the codes that we have, I think it's parking, it talks about setbacks and driveway widths for residential, that if you can't meet the minimum 8 feet width and have the setback, I think that section of the code allows administration to change it to reduce the setback or reduce the minimum driveway width. Very similar to this. So you basically, if it's not feasible to have 12 and you can prove 10 will work, and you can go. But otherwise, the standard is 12.
And I would be more comfortable with a standard of 12, actually, on the previous, on point 6.
Well, and to staff's point, I mean, we're looking at not just the functionality of getting a car through there. Keep in mind, a parking stall is generally 9 feet wide, but we want the ability to open the door, get out of your car if you're choking or something's going on, or have somebody able to walk up alongside the car and open it up to get you out.
And I believe you said earlier that in order to walk up and to open the door would take 3 feet. So 9 feet plus 3 gets 12.
You know, we erred on the side of being conservative. You know, again, we're removing an entire lane. And I have to tell you, as coming back from a trip last week, I used an emergency lane in Milwaukee to get out of a drive-through. So, you know, there has to be some trade-off. And I think we're trying to, again, find that balance where we need enough width to make that function.
And again, hopefully it never happens ever, but if somebody got stuck in a drive-through lane and you couldn't access it because it was too narrow and they had some medical emergency or something, I mean, that would be horrible.
And I understand. I mean, I get that, but if we're looking at the average vehicle being 6.5 feet and a minimum 10 foot, I mean, that you still have 3 feet there, 3.5 feet to work with. But again, that's, you know, if you're dealing with the average car.
Right. So we always kind of plan for the worst case. You know, we think about the F-250s and the vans and the larger vehicles that go through. So, I mean, franchisees, you know, they build that into their model as a minimum, but I think we have to consider that as well, that, you know, it isn't one size fits all here, I think.
Okay. I guess another concern that I had was number 5. Sounds from any speakers used on the premise shall not be audible at the boundary of any surrounding residential district or any residential property. So how does that pertain? So let's say we were to get like a Walgreens or something downtown, and they were up against a actually not even downtown, but if we were to get a Walgreens somewhere and it was next to an apartment building. You know, Walgreens has their drive-through. They have you know, their voice activated drive-through. Are we saying that they wouldn't be able to operate there next to an apartment building because there's noise ordinance standards there?
Possibly. That's existing language. It's in the ordinance already. And I don't think it's rocket science. I think it's literally, is it audible from the property line? I think it's just, is there noise from the menu board typically with fast food? I don't know that Walgreens has that, although there's the conversation at the window usually. But it's just, is it audible at the property line for residential property?
So if you have 2 buildings next to each other, and that property line is obviously going to be closer. If you put wouldn't that prohibit a drive-through lane occurring in between those 2 buildings?
It might. I guess it also could be an enforcement issue. They might be able to meet the code initially, but if there's complaints down the road, we'd have to enforce on that and try and remedy that situation.
Well, and keep in mind, it's the residential is the key to that as well. So if in your downtown area, those are typically mixed use properties, not a strict residential. And you can usually block that noise with some arborvitae or a fence or some type of landscaping can usually block noise.
Is that something that should be delineated into that, I imagine, in terms of explaining that a mixed-use project does not have, what would be the standard be for it to be next to a mixed-use project, I guess?
Well, I think the language kind of speaks for itself. It talks about any surrounding residential district or any residential properties. So residence is just off limits, I guess, when it comes to that situation.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, Paul?
I think this requirement talks about the relationship between a commercial property and a residential property, whether it's zoned residential or if it's the residential use itself. I suppose that could be a residential in the downtown possibly, but I think it's applicable to residents, period.
May I ask Paul a question? Lisa?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So residence meaning in a house or residence in an apartment? What kind of residence, Paul?
Any kind of residence.
Okay, so would it make any sense to have language that would say that the noise from any kind of a drive-through, the sound from any kind of speaker should not exceed the sound that's in the general area? For example, you have properties that are on two very busy streets, on the corner of two very busy streets, which are loud areas. And the drive-through, the sound from the speaker could be actually softer than the sound of all the traffic around the buildings. And oh boy, this one is so sketchy to me because shall not be audible. What does that mean, audible? How many decibels make it audible? If you can just hear it a little.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. And I think the University Avenue is a good example of that, where the Burger King went in, and there's a residence right next door. They have a menu board, and I think literally standing at the property line, if you could hear the conversation between someone buying food and the restaurant itself, that would be considered enforceable on our part, that it's audible. So again, they would have to mitigate that in some way as an enforcement.
So if you were standing, for example, on the other side of a drive-through, but it was not exactly on the drive-through property, it was on the easement, and you could hear something, then, and you happened to live in the building next to it, even though you weren't in your apartment at the time, would that count? I mean, would it?
I think the ordinance, I think the language, the existing language kind of speaks for itself. Is it audible from the speaker? And the speaker meaning the menu board. If you can hear it at the property line, then that's enforceable on our part. So if we got a complaint, that's how we would respond. We would send an inspector out at the property line and see if the speaker was audible at that point.
So then maybe not having it. Some places don't even have speakers, so it doesn't even matter. Some places you just call into, so. Okay.
Right, so this is not a decibel level necessarily, which we do have noise requirements. This is just simply the speaker and the relationship to the residential property or residential use.
Madam Chair, we do have a motion and a second on the floor to refer this back to staff. We haven't been able to meet Director Strickschutte's hope that we could give you a specific number, but I think we're looking for a number that has some clear support behind it as to why the number is the one it is.
I think that's enough, Commissioner. That's enough for us to come back as staff and take a look at this. I think we've had enough discussion that we know if we identify an option or two or an alternative or two to bring back, I think the items we need to relook at and refine are pretty clear. So.
Okay. So we had a motion was by you, Commissioner Bremer, to send back. Who had the second?
Alder Corpus Dax. Willing to second.
Seems so long ago.
And Brett
But yes, I'll second it.
Okay. Okay. Is there any further discussion? I think we've kind of given some good direction to staff. All right. Seeing that it looks like there's no further discussion, we'll go ahead and do a voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so that's unanimously approved then to be referred back to staff. Okay, and moving on to item number 3, public hearing on a request to amend Chapter 13-714, Table 7-3, permitted accessory use regarding solar energy systems submitted by the zoning administrator. And in regards to the public hearing, we will be looking for interested parties who are in favor. Are there any interested parties that are opposed? And is there anyone looking to provide information only? Is there anyone wishing to speak? Is there anyone else wishing to speak? Is there anyone else wishing to speak? Let the record reflect that no one came forward and this public hearing is now closed. Moving on to agenda item number 4, discussion and consideration on a request to amend Chapter 13-714, Table 7-3, permitted accessory use regarding solar energy systems submitted by the zoning administrator.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's me. So this is another text amendment. This has to do with solar energy systems. Back in 2012, we developed some language to permit solar energy systems, both those that are attached to roof systems and those that are freestanding. Through the years, we've made some changes or some adjustments. Most notably in 2014, we made some changes to permit roof-mounted systems on residential properties, R1 and R2, but still required a conditional use permit for freestanding systems. We failed to make a change at that time to correct the mixed use district, which is the office residential and the NC or neighborhood center district. So solar energy systems are accessory uses in mostly all the districts. Currently, they are conditional in the OR and NC for accessory uses to dwellings and accessory uses to non-residential dwellings or uses, like commercial uses. So this kind of stems from a request, actually at fire station number 5 to install a roof-mounted system, solar energy system there. So we felt it was appropriate to change the mixed use district to permit what we call flush mount or roof mount systems, but still keeping the solar energy systems that are non-flush mount or freestanding as conditional. So we made that change, we're proposing that change in both the accessory to dwellings and the accessory to non-residential uses. I think our concern years ago was we didn't know what these systems were going to look like. They were going to probably stand out like a sore thumb. I think actually through the years, the technology has changed, it's improved. So roof-mounted systems can almost be truly flush. You really couldn't maybe even tell in some cases that there is a solar energy system associated with them. So we want to make this change to be proactive, and that's the reason for our change tonight. So this is the draft ordinance before you, and staff is recommending approval of this based on the changes to the tables here in Chapter 13-714.
Okay, thank you so much, Paul. Go ahead, Vice Chair Miller.
Thank you. Paul, I think you already answered my question, but I just want to ask it anyway. Since the solar equipment seems to be becoming much more popular and probably will continue to be, do we feel we're pretty well suited to, in all the rest of the ordinance as well, to handle that? Or is there any other proactive work that might need to be?
I think we glanced through the ordinance. I think this was the one that kind of stood out as being a need to be changed. In the downtown district, it's already permitted. We made some adjustments to R1 and R2, so we're confident this will cover us for those districts.
Great, thanks.
Was there any more discussion amongst the commission?
I'm very glad to see the expansion of this possibility.
Move to approve.
All right, so we've got a motion by Vice Chair Miller, a second by Alder Corpus Dax. Any further discussion? All right, we'll move along with a voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, so then that will move, looks like unanimously approved. That'll move along to City Council. And is that, let's see, what is today? The 8th?
I think it's the
The
16th.
16th? Okay, so moving to City Council for March 16th. Okay, and moving on to informational, Director's Report.
Just one quick update, Madam Chair. We're looking at, just want to let the commission know, staff has been working the last several weeks on updating several project plans for relating to 4 different TIF districts within the city. That's TIF District 7, 8, 9, and 23. We are working on an allocation amendment to move some funds available from TIF 7 to pay for a project in that district over to TIF 23 to allow us to close TIF 7 on schedule. Sounds a little counterintuitive. Because they are right next to each other, the movement of funds allows us to really continue with the project to get it done this year and still allow us to close TIF 7. We're also working on a couple of the affordable housing extensions for those related districts. I think that's specifically 7 and 8, I think, are the two where we're looking at making sure we're going to be collecting one more additional year of increment to help establish the affordable housing fund that is allowed by state statute. So those are in process. So all 7, 8, and 9 will all 3 be closed coming here this spring, and TID 23 is a relatively brand new one, but it needs to be amended to basically to accept the allocation from TID 7 to allow us to hang on to that and proceed with the pedestrian improvements. It is a defined project. It is not an open discussion. We actually do have a defined pedestrian related improvements we're using to use the funds for that should have been done in TIF 7, but a project was delayed due to the pandemic. So it was a hospitality related project, a hotel. Obviously, I think no one should be overly surprised that a hotel decided to not get moving underneath pandemic conditions at this time. So folks, they just met, the Joint Review Board just met for its initial time today. We'll be going to the Redevelopment Authority, the RDA, with the city tomorrow, and that will be coming towards the Plan Commission, or for the City Council then on March 16th for review. So if anyone has any questions on that, happy to elaborate if there are any.
Okay, thank you so much, Neil. Right, and the date of the next meeting is March 22nd, 2021.
Will you
Motion to
accept the
adjourn.
motion to adjourn?
Motion by Commissioner Bremer, second by Alder Corpus Dax. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And hearing
Thank you
none,
all.
the meeting is adjourned. You guys all have a good night.
Good
Thank you,
night.
everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
For more sunshine.
Right.